Deploying artificial intelligence and robotics in high-stakes environments, like clinical wards and humanitarian disaster zones, requires absolute safety. Yet the current industry standard relies heavily on software-bound policy limits to govern these life-critical systems, introducing known mechanical vulnerabilities. Software-level guardrails are inherently susceptible to buffer overflows, and they struggle to contain the mathematical unpredictability of autonomous predictive pathfinding. This creates an environment ripe for agentic drift, where a system's goals subtly shift over time. It also leaves the architecture exposed to time-of-check to time-of-use exploits, meaning an AI could hypothetically alter its intent in the microseconds after a security protocol has given it the green light. This chart outlines the architecture of standard probabilistic clinical AI. As detailed in the sensing row on the left, these models rely heavily on high-fidelity optical cameras and acoustic microphones. This approach necessitates cloud connectivity and creates massive privacy liabilities for monitored individuals. To achieve a standard of zero preventable harm, AI governance cannot be a descriptive policy document or a reversible software patch. It must be enforced by uncompromising physical reality. The A13 platform is engineered to eliminate probabilistic drift entirely. Looking at the right side of this comparison, the architecture operates on a physics-based governance substrate. Its rules are driven by invariants stored directly in read-only memory, creating an environment with zero software bypass. This architecture operates under what is known as the Eyes of the Sky protocol, a strict operational standard designed specifically for unstructured, hazardous environments. This schematic displays the core structural principle of the platform. It utilizes a dual-node architecture that physically isolates the observation layer, operating at an autonomy level of 0, from the kinetic robotic workspace on the right, where physical actuation occurs. By mechanically segregating the system's eyes from its muscle, the architecture makes autonomous, unprompted robotic action a structural impossibility. To eliminate the risk of mass surveillance, the observation node completely abandons the use of optical cameras and acoustic microphones. As illustrated here, the Sentinel module maps the surrounding environment without lenses. It relies exclusively on a recessed 905 nanometer non-imaging LiDAR array. The raw spatial point cloud data captured by this array is instantly converted into anonymous 96-cell voxel occupancy grids and center of mass velocity vectors. Any raw distance data captured during this process is permanently destroyed in static volatile registers in strictly under 90 milliseconds. Because identity parameters are stripped at the silicon level, true privacy is guaranteed by hardware absence rather than a software promise that could be rewritten. Between this observation node and the physical actuators sits the A7 bridge layer, a critical translation gateway that enforces system isolation. This bridge is defined by a physical 3 mm galvanic opto-isolated air gap separating the logic circuits from the motor energy rails. Signal transmission across this divide is strictly unidirectional. The optical transceivers bridging this gap physically lack copper receive traces on the return path. Because data physically cannot flow backward, the kinetic robotic arm is mechanically blocked from initiating an autonomous pathfinding loopback into the observation node. When the observation node detects an anomaly and calculates an emergency detection score, the system does not and cannot act immediately. This diagram details the sacred pause timing gate. It is a hardware-enforced deliberation delay, lasting exactly 25 to 1,000 milliseconds, operating entirely on an independent oscillator domain. Authorizing the system to take kinetic action requires a precise tripartite human authentication sequence. As shown above, the timing gate, 3 concurrent locks must be satisfied: a local biological iris scan, a physical cryptographic USB token, and continuous kinetic pressure on a normally open foot pedal. The AI is strictly relegated to a non-kinetic advisory stratum. It observes and proposes, but only sovereign human authority can release the mechanical permits for execution. This brings us to the active mechatronic assistance prototype, the muscle array, designated for physical manipulation. Even when human authorization is successfully granted, the resulting kinetic action remains strictly bounded by physical laws, rather than just lines of code. The active joint velocity vectors are mechatronically constrained to the Jacobian's null space. This projection mathematically dissipates reaction torques, preventing kinetic forces from destabilizing the hosting platform. Furthermore, this cross-section shows that physical torque is permanently capped at exactly 8.0 Newton meters by spring-loaded friction slip clutches built directly into the joints. If a software fault demands maximum force, the physical clutches will simply slip. The laws of physics override faulty code to protect human life. This leaves one final vulnerability: preventing future engineers from altering safety limits through routine firmware updates entirely by executable, type-safe infrastructure. Looking at Section 5.2 of the technical specifications, physical limits, such as the 8.0 Newton-meter torque cap and the 1.05 millisecond break latency, are hard-coded into the kinematic constraint layer via an executable configuration script. This gauge illustrates the hardware-enforced orange code cap. The computational allocation is physically starved, throttled to exactly 1.1 times the baseline monitoring requirement. This mechanical limit makes running an unauthorized, multi-layered neural network pathfinding loop computationally impossible. During a software build, if an engineer submits code violating these physical constraints, the compiler instantly emits a validation error and halts execution. By treating physical safety limits as compile time assertions, the compiler automates the regulatory gate, rejecting code drift before it can reach the hardware. Once an action is authorized and executed, the platform mandates absolute forensic accountability. Every state transition is permanently recorded by the WD117 OTP ledger. It secures records using post-quantum cryptography and physical one-time programmable fuses. Connecting via a unidirectional SPI bus lacking receive traces makes remote alteration of records a physical impossibility. The platform replaces subjective digital logging with cryptographically signed, tamper-proof hardware evidence, ensuring perfect historical transparency. This diagram illustrates the complete sovereign-in-the-loop pipeline, progressing from anonymous observation through strict physical air gaps, requiring tripartite human authorization, and concluding with physically constrained execution. This pipeline demonstrates that high-performance robotic assistance and absolute, non-agentic governance can operate together successfully. Because the underlying hardware invariants are universal, this architecture supports multiple deployment scenarios, ranging from humanitarian field clinics to deep space operations. Physical invariants, strictly backed by compiler assertions, guarantee that the system will not drift from its constitutional boundaries over time. In the highest stakes environments, safety cannot rely on software suggestions. It must be governance built into the execution itself.